Journey. Good evening, travelers. Tonight's bold journey is a rather remarkable one and unusually dramatic. On the 23rd of February, 1954, 6 young men from France conquered Aconcagua, the highest mountain in the world outside of the Himalayas. We don't mean to cast a cloud on this conquest when we say that this was a shoestring expedition. It's more to their credit that such was the case. Unlike most expeditions, they didn't have a professional photographer along. The films of this climb were photographed by Mr. Edmond Denis more for his own future enjoyment than for commercial purposes. And when finally the camera records the 6 men reaching the top of Aconcagua from the most difficult approach, the south side, the camera stops. For thereafter, Edmond Denis and his 5 associates were in no condition to photograph anything, nor did they care. Friends, in order to catch our guests, we've had to leave our studios. 6 men reached the summit of the mountain Aconcagua, and 5 were later to suffer severe amputations. Of these 5 men, the hardest hit was our guest for tonight, Mr. Edmond Denis of Paris, France. It's with a great deal of pleasure that we welcome him to our program series, together with his longtime friend, Mr. Ben Smith, who will also act as his interpreter. Well, how are you, Mr. Denis?
Hello,
Mr. Smith?
Hello, John.
I understand that you're spending some time in Los Angeles with friends here before you're departing for Paris. Now,
that's right.
Would you tell us, please, when are you leaving?
Well, we're leaving just the day after tomorrow, John. This is the last lap on our journey, and we have to get back to Paris because of commitments. We're very happy to be on Bold Journey because this is probably the last chance you'll get to see or hear Mr. Denis for a long time. I have to travel with Edmond because he doesn't speak one word of English, and so I do the translation for him.
All right, then. I'll ask Mr. Denis the questions, and you'll translate for us. Mr. Denis, why did you pick this huge South American mountain to climb so far from France?
Pourquoi est-ce que tu as choisi cette montagne haute de l'Aconcagua qui est si loin de la France?
Eh bien, nous avons choisi l'Aconcagua parce que son versant sud présentait un versant très difficile à gravir et que de plus c'est quand même la montagne la plus haute en dehors du massif himalayen.
He said the main reason they chose Aconcagua was because its southern face presents a sheer wall 10,000 feet high and presented many difficulties which are interesting to the alpine-type mountain climbers.
And we look forward to seeing that. Mr. Denis, had Aconcagua ever been climbed before?
Est-ce qu'on n'a jamais gravi Aconcagua avant?
Oui, la première ascension de l'Aconcagua date de 1897 par un guide suisse, Mathias de Bringen, qui a gravi le versant nord sans trop de difficultés, mais le versant sud, évidemment, personne ne l'avait gravi.
He said that the first time Aconcagua was climbed was by its easy northern slope way back in 1897, a Swiss guide called Zübrigen. But of course, no one had ever been near the southern face, much less think of climbing it.
So this was a dramatic first.
Indeed it was.
Mr. Smith, would you tell our audience, please, what happened to Mr. Denis as a result of this climb?
Yes, Mr. Denis and 4 of his companions were very severely frostbitten on this climb. Denis was the hardest hit of the lot. He lost parts of the fingers of his right hand, and he lost fully half of each one of his feet.
Sounds like a terrible ordeal. And Mr. Smith, would you please convey our admiration to Mr. Denis, which I'm sure I express for all of our viewers watching Bold Journey.
John dit que tu es un jeune homme très brave et il veut exprimer toute l'admiration que non seulement Bold Journey, mais que tous les auditeurs de ce programme ont pour toi et l'exploit que vous avez accompli.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Denis and Mr. Smith. Ladies and gentlemen, 6 Frenchmen make the conquest of Aconcagua by the south side look easy. But the man who planned the British assault of Mount Everest, Sir John Hunt, claims that the taking of Aconcagua by the southern face was more difficult than Everest. Here now is the epic journey, Aconcagua, with Mr. Edmond Denis, with English translation by Mr. Ben Smith.
Tout de suite après la victoire en février 54, nos familles sont très alarmées par les titres des journaux.
Right after our victory over the southern face of Aconcagua in February 1954, the headlines of the world press, of course, came out with all sorts of wild stories about the frostbite and alarmed our folks back home.
Enfin, tu vois, John, nous avons quitté Bordeaux le 18 décembre 53 et c'était la première fois pour nous que nous allions quitter la vieille Europe et voir enfin du pays.
This is on the 18th of December 1953, John, starting off from Bordeaux on the Atlantic coast in France. For the 6 boys who were eventually to get to the top of the southern face of Aconcagua, this was the first time that they had ever left Europe. They had ever done any climbing outside of Europe.
We mentioned, Mr. Smith, that this was to be a shoestring expedition. How much did this expedition cost each member?
This expedition cost each one of the boys about $300 or $400 out of their own pockets, which they managed to beg, borrow, or steal before leaving France, John.
I see.
Enfin, nous sommes arrivés à Buenos Aires le 7 janvier 54 et là, nous n'avons pas perdu de temps. Nous sommes vite partis en avion pour Mendoza au pied de la cordillère des Andes.
Having arrived in Buenos Aires in January, we lost no time there. We immediately took a DC-3, which was kindly lent by the Argentine government, and started off for Mendoza, 800 miles to the west, on the first lap of our journey in South America.
Nous avons traversé toute la Pampa argentine, puis de Mendoza, nous avons directement survolé la Aconcagua, la plus haute montagne d'Amérique du Sud.
Bypassing Mendoza, they decided to go on a reconnoitering flight over the southern face of Aconcagua. Here it is, 23,000 feet high, John, and you can only see a very small portion of the face that the boys climbed over the wing of the plane.
Nous nous trouvions devant la plus haute montagne des 2 Amériques. Nous en étions très fiers tant que nous étions dans l'avion, mais il fallait penser à gravir cette immense face que tu vois.
They got a little too close for comfort in this particular shot. They got caught in air pockets, and they thought that the expedition would end right then and there. They're very happy, of course, to get back on terra firma in Mendoza.
And in spite of this preview of things to come, they were anxious, I imagine, to get ahead with the expedition.
Well, they had come quite a ways to do it, and they weren't going to turn back for anything now, John.
Enfin, de Puente del Inca, nous sommes partis à dos de mule. Pendant 18 heures environ, nous avons remonté l'immense vallée du glacier Orcones inférieur.
Separating our equipment into packs of 150 to 200 pounds, which were carried by mules, we trekked off across the Orcones Basin and through the Orcones Valley to the foot of Mount Aconcagua. Here we are, arriving at Mount Aconcagua by the Orcones Valley, which had never, by the way, John, been trod by any Europeans before. This is completely uncharted territory.
Nous avions devant les yeux une des plus grandes faces du monde. Elle fait plus de 10 000 pieds de haut sur près de 23 000 pieds de large.
10,000 feet high and 21,000 feet wide. Our base camp was set up a good 3 miles away from the face of Aconcagua because there was danger of avalanches.
Pendant près de 5 jours, nous avons dû creuser et enterrer nos tentes pour ne pas que le vent les emporte, car le vent soufflait terriblement fort.
No coolies or Sherpas were available here. We didn't find anybody willing to bring our packs up on the mountain, and so we had to do the work ourselves. We set in 3 tents. We had a lot of difficulty setting them in because the wind was very, very strong and blew away 2 of our tents on our first attempt.
Enfin, le camp était solide, nous avions bien enterré les tentes, le vent pouvait souffler. Nous allions pouvoir regarder la face pour laquelle nous étions venus.
Now the wind could blow. Our tents were solidly set in with huge boulders, and we knew they would not be blown away, and we had time now to worry about setting up an advanced Camp 1. Here are the members of the expedition reading top row and then bottom row left to right.
Paragot, Poulet, Ferlet, the chief, me, Lucien Bérardini et Pierre Lesseur. Nous pouvions regarder la montagne qui nous présentait toutes ses défenses.
As if forewarned of our presence, the mountain unleashed these huge avalanches which come roaring down about 45 miles an hour. Bear in mind, John, that this is taken about 2.5 to 3 miles away. They come roaring down, crashing down into the Orcones Valley below. They completely cross the Orcones Glacier, which is no less than 1.5 miles wide. And they even come up about 500 or 600 yards on the opposite face.
Terrifying.
C'est compte tenu de l'itinéraire que suivaient ces énormes avalanches que nous avons ouvert notre propre itinéraire dans un immense éperon de rochers qui nous a permis d'installer un camp 1 sans trop de difficultés et à l'abri des grosses avalanches.
We had to take the couloirs of avalanches into account, of course, when we were climbing. There were two on either side of a large buttress, a large spur, which we finally decided would be the logical route to take in order to set up at Camp 1. It was very hard climbing because the rock was very cruddy, very loose.
De ce camp, nous pouvions regarder la suite de l'itinéraire, suite peu engageante.
Once Camp 1 was solidly set in, we could view what was facing us before we could get to Camp 2. The avalanches came roaring over us, but they didn't hurt us this time because we were not in the avalanche couloirs. It was just powdery snow.
And in spite of these omens or signs, the party continued.
Well, the weather was pretty good, John, and so we thought we had a pretty good chance of making it if we could do it in one fell swoop like we climb in the Alps.
Nous étions séparés en deux équipes, une équipe de 4 lourdes qui avait pour mission de monter du matériel dans la montagne, une équipe de 2 légères qui avait pour mission d'installer des cordes fixes pour permettre aux 4 de grimper plus facilement. Ici, un passage à l'altitude du Mont Blanc à près de 14 500 pieds.
Here is Paragot negotiating a rather touchy passage about 15,000 feet up, which is higher than he's ever been before. It's about the altitude of the top of Mont Blanc, which is the highest mountain in Europe. There were many, many more passages more difficult than this, which we could not film, John, because of the danger involved. Of course, you realize that you can't take angle shots when you have a very small ledge to stand on.
Of course.
Après ce passage, nous en avons rencontré bien d'autres plus ou moins difficiles que nous n'avons pas eu le courage ni la possibilité de filmer souvent. Toutefois, vers 15 000 pieds d'altitude, nous avons dû surmonter ce que nous avions appelé les grandes tours. Ce sont d'immenses barres de rochers absolument verticales.
You can see here, John, that the belaying is sometimes more moral than effective. In this type of climbing, you do the best you can and you just hope that nobody slides, because if he does slide, he brings you down with him. Late in this particular day of climbing, we encountered a very difficult passage before getting to the altitude of 15,500 feet, where camp number 2 was to be set up. We called these the huge towers, and you'll see them in the next shot.
Et d'ailleurs, arrivé en haut de ces tours, après avoir installé le matériel nécessaire pour un camp 2, que nous avons été pris par le mauvais temps. Vous allez voir les tours dans un instant.
The towers are now in the background in the center. They had to climb these before setting up Camp 2. Here's one of them covered with ice and snow. It was just short of the top of these towers at about 15,000 feet that we were suddenly overtaken by a very violent storm. Fortunately, we had our ropes set in and we were able to clamber down with our lives. We had a tough time getting down, but we did make it. And in a matter of minutes after the storm started, this is the way that the southern face of Aconcagua looked.
Pendant près de 8 jours, nous sommes restés bloqués au camp de base. Tout était plâtré de neige, de verglas, il faisait extrêmement froid et nous ne savions pas si la paroi voudrait bien se dégager pour nous permettre enfin de vaincre.
The temperature was down to 40 or 45 degrees below zero during all this time, John, and we were just sitting at base camp going from one tent to the other and wondering if we would ever be able to climb this mountain because of the storm. And all we could do was wait.
Thank you, Mr. Denis and Mr. Smith. We'll be back with you in a moment. The expedition has been forced to retreat. Here once again to resume the battle is Mr. Edmond Denis, with translation by Mr. Ben Smith.
Enfin, le soleil est revenu, et avec lui est revenu évidemment les grosses avalanches que nous regardons partir cette fois-ci avec joie, car c'est le signe que la paroisse dégage de toute sa neige fraîche.
And after about a week, the sun finally did come back, John, and this time we viewed the avalanches with joy in our hearts because it meant that all this side of the mountain would be freed of all the loose snow and we might finally be able to go on our climb.
Nous avons encore attendu quelques jours au camp de base que le beau temps s'établisse définitivement, et pendant ces quelques jours, nous nous sommes suralimentés et préparés en vue de l'assaut final.
Here we are preparing ourselves for the final assault. I set up a hasty barber shop and all the boys took their turns. This is what we call the southern face of Aconcagua haircut, a little refreshing on the edges.
Ici, je n'étais pas très sûr dans mon coup de ciseau. Peut-être était-ce l'altitude. Un petit coup à droite, un petit coup à gauche, à droite, à gauche. pour finir en beauté à droite. Le soleil est là, nous allons pouvoir partir et voici l'itinéraire que nous avons suivi.
The boys don't look human anymore, but we didn't have any girlfriends to see, so it didn't matter. And here now is the route that we are going to follow. You'll be able to follow it from bottom to top, all the way up to 22,835 feet.
Exactement dans l'axe de l'écran se déroule tout l'itinéraire suivi.
Here's the itinerary right in the center, over these huge towers where we set up Camp 1, across the glacier, 3, 4, 5, and finally 7 at the top. 7 days were spent climbing this mountain.
Jusqu'à présent, le camp 1 est installé. Lucien et moi, nous installons le camp 2 en haut des tours.
Camp 1, where you see it there, is already installed, and I and Lucien Bérardini are going up now to install Camp 2 and set up the ramps for Camp 2.
Nous avions installé des cordes fixes sur lesquelles remontent nos camarades qui viennent nous rejoindre après 2 jours d'attente. Ici, nous voici au pied du dernier passage des tours à 15 000 pieds d'altitude, vraiment dans le domaine de la verticale.
It took us 2 days to set up Camp 2 on a very small ledge, 6 by 8, and then the 4 lads carrying heavy equipment followed us up 2 days later. Here they are, arriving the last difficult passage to the top of those huge towers we've been talking about. You can see that the rope in the center, a little bit to the right, is quite vertical. We're absolutely in the domain of vertical climbing here. As a matter of fact, we decided to throw a rope down to belay our boys. Here it is coming down now. The rucksacks would be attached to the rope, and the men would take the route to the right along that fixed ramp, which you see there, John.
Avec Lucien, nous avons hissé les 4 charges là-haut, et puis les hommes nous ont rejoints à ce que nous avions appelé le camp 2.
We pulled all our heavy equipment up by means of this telepheric, which we had thrown down, and here is one of the boys going up, getting to the top where we set up one tent on a small ledge, 6 by 8. Here we are 15,500 feet up.
And this rock condition is what you mean by crud.
Exactly, that's what's called crud in mountaineering language.
Avec Lucien, nous n'avions pu installer qu'une seule tente, et comme nous étions 6, 3 ont couché dans la tente et les 3 autres ont couché dehors.
There were 6 of us here, of course, and so only 3 of us were able to sleep in this small tent, which is actually only meant for 2. 3 of us slept in, and 3 of us roped ourselves in and slept out. We had to watch our step every minute of the time, because on all sides of the 6 by 8 ledge there was a sheer drop of several hundred feet to the nearest ledge.
Nous étions à 15 000 pieds d'altitude et nous abandonnions tout derrière nous. Pour nous maintenant, c'était l'inconnu de près de plus de 7000 pieds de parois.
We were up 15,500 feet, and here we had cut our bridges behind us. This is the point of no return, John. We knew that when we start the final assault on the next day, that we're not going to be able to come down by this same route. We smoke one last cigarette overlooking base camp, prepare our equipment for the next day, take a frugal meal, and wait for the dawn.
Le lendemain matin, il faisait grand beau temps et nous sommes partis, nous avons remonté le glacier médian. Nous venions de passer la nuit au camp numéro 2, nous partions vers le 3 et le 4.
We had just spent the night at camp number 2, and the next morning we were leaving for camp number 3, which you see there, and number 4. We only negotiated something like 1,200 feet on the middle glacier of the southern face of Aconcagua on that first day. These shots are really a lot more vertical than they look.
Ici, la neige était très profonde, le glacier était très crevassé, nous étions très lourdement chargés et nous étions surtout à plus de 15 000 pieds d'altitude. Le soir, nous avons installé un petit bivouac et nous avons passé la nuit dehors à la belle étoile.
The snow was very, very loose here, very soft. And with our very heavy packs, we had quite a time making that 1,200 feet on the first day of the actual assault. Bear in mind also that we're up to 16,000 feet and breathing is getting very difficult in spite of the acclimatization we'd gone through for 2 or 3 weeks before. What we mean by a bivouac is this. This is the first bivouac after Camp 1. No longer are we able to set up any tents. We just dig into the mountain and sit and wait for the dawn to come. The next morning, the great difficulty started. We had to don the crampons and go clambering up over this ice-covered slope.
Là, nous ne formions plus qu'une seule corde et 6, John. Nous nous étions tous attachés à la queue leu-leu et nous avons remonté toute la journée dans de la neige, de la glace, en prenant chacun notre tour la tête de la cordée.
We decided it was safer in this particular type of climbing to rope ourselves in Indian file about 90 feet apart, each one of us taking the lead from time to time in order to relieve the others. As you know, John, the lead man is the one who does most of the work, who digs in. Here I am negotiating a rather delicate passage, and I think that here, John, you can very well see what we mean when we say that on this type of climbing you cannot wear heavy overshoes, you cannot burden yourself down with any heavy oxygen or anything like that. You need your feet, your hands, every ounce of your strength to negotiate passages like this.
C'est sur la pointe des pieds, un petit peu comme des danseuses de cordes, que nous avons réussi à surmonter ce passage qui nous a demandé des heures. Et juste au-dessus, nous avons pu installer le deuxième bivouac.
This particular passage took us something like 7 hours for the 6 of us to pass it. It was about 30 feet high, and right at the top we installed our bivouac or camp number 4, if you prefer.
C'est là que nous avons bu pour la dernière fois, la fois suivante étant 5 jours plus tard.
We always look with some emotion at these shots here because it's the last time we were able to drink or eat anything for 5 days until we got down to the Mendoza hospital 5 days later. The next morning, of course, we had to don our crampons again and climb this vertical wall of ice.
Pour nous, il ne restait qu'une solution, atteindre le sommet et redescendre par le versant nord si facile. Toute la journée, nous avons grimpé dans de la neige, de la glace. Il a fait jusqu'à moins 45 degrés Fahrenheit, en dessous de zéro. C'est au cours de cette journée que nos pieds furent gelés.
Midway through this day of climbing, John, after winding around in the crevices of the top glacier for something like 3 or 4 hours, we came to the end of a crevice and hit upon a dead end. A blank ice wall 120 feet high. Here we thought that we could never get out over it, but we had to try because we couldn't rappel back. At 18,000 feet you can't rappel onto any ledges, there aren't any. We had gone through this glacier for something like 4 or 5 hours and we were spent. We were tired. We didn't have anything to eat. Our feet were frozen. The temperature was 45 degrees below zero. We had to get out or die in the effort. Paragot took us up to the top after Bérardini had taken us up 60 feet. And when he got to the top, he was so spent that all he could do was gesture very feebly before keeling over completely. He's completely spent and passes out.
Excuse me, this is very honestly incredible.
Ensuite, nous sommes passés un à un avec nos sacs, nos charges, et nous avons débouché sur l'immense glacier supérieur à plus de 18 000 pieds d'altitude. Il nous a fallu toute la journée pour le traverser, et il nous restait encore beaucoup de parois à gravir qui nous ont demandé 3 jours et 2 nuits.
We thought that when he had reached the top of this ice wall that it was going to be relatively easy, but we had about 4,000 feet of climbing to do yet, John. We thought we had it made when we got to the top of the ice wall. Of course, we were viewing this with our alpine eyes and we weren't used to the scale of the mountain here. Our feet were thoroughly frozen by this time. The temperature was 40 to 45 degrees below zero all the time.
Nous avons passé la nuit tous accrochés, comme d'habitude, dans un petit bivouac au camp numéro 5, et le lendemain, nous sommes partis vers le 6 et enfin le sommet.
We roped ourselves in that night on the glacier and slept as best we could, caught 40 winks. You can see camp number 5 and 6, and 7, of course, would be on top.
Ici, les dernières prises de vue que nous avons eu le courage de filmer, et enfin l'arrivée au sommet.
This is the last shot that we took, or one of the last shots, the arrival on the summit on the 24th of February 1954, after having spent 7 days and 6 nights climbing the southern face of Aconcagua. Here is the profile of the southern face which we have just climbed.
We thank you so very much, Mr. Denis and Mr. Smith, for this truly impressive story. We know you'll enjoy next week's journey. We look forward to your company. John Stevenson saying goodbye then, until next week.